Somebody sees a friend that he hasn't seen for 30 days. Omer Baruch Shechianu v'Kimanu v'Genu Zman hazeh. You make a bracha of Shechianu. And if you haven't seen somebody, Laka Yud Beis Chodesh, Omer Baruch Machayim Meisi. And this halacha is codified in the Shulchan Aruch, who adds, based on Tosfos, that the individual referred to must be a close friend whom one is happy to see. It's not just anybody. You have a close friend and you're honestly happy to see him. And the Shulchan Aruch stipulates, it's got to be somebody, a good friend, that you're happy to see him, not just a mere acquaintance. The Mishnah Berurah points out that the machlokas achronim, whether one recites the bracha, if one has been in touch with his friend in the interim, by phone, by mail, let's say you've been in touch with them, you haven't seen them, so he concludes that one should not recite the bracha in this case, due to safek brachas lahakil. That if we have a doubt, if we're uncertain whether we make a bracha or not, the halacha is not to make the bracha, because it's to be mekel rather than say the name of Hashem. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Im kibel mimenu ksav, if you had gotten a letter from this friend, or somebody passed on greetings from your friend, or vice versa. Yesh deos ba'achronim, the safek brachos lahakir. That there's deos that you should not make the bracha, and therefore the Mishnah Berurah seems to say that in general, if you were in contact somehow by us, by phone, by email, etc., then just because you didn't see the person physically, you wouldn't make the bracha. However, the Sharat Tziyun there adds that if one's friend was sick in the interim and has now recovered, you would recite a Shechianu. Says the Sharat Tziyun Nireh, Dahainu shashalomito. That which we say, you don't necessarily have to say Shechianu if you had stayed in touch with him, is if he's been well. The Yishamashu Chola, but if he found that the person was sick, and then when you see him again after the long time of absence, he was healthy, then he thinks he should say Shechianu. Seeing somebody who's healed from his illness, that's a greater joy than not hearing from the person even by a letter. And the Pischei Teshuvos in the footnote says, this seems to understand to mean that if one received a letter that one's friend was ill, one recites Shechianu upon seeing him after recovering, even if one already knew he had recovered. So their physical seeing would trigger the bracha. So one could argue, based on this Sharat Tziyun, that perhaps one should indeed recite a bracha in cases of COVID-19 if one was aware that his friend was ill and then recovered. Nevertheless, Rav Asher Weiss was asked this question by a doctor in London and responded that it should not be recited. Don't recite the bracha. He explains that our custom is generally never to recite the bracha of Shechianu in such cases. And so too, it should not be recited in this case. One should, though, certainly give thanks to Hashem in the vernacular without a bracha. You should say, thank God, or whatever. Person sees his friend who was healed from corona. During his sickness, he was in quarantine. He's very happy to see his friend who's healed. Should he make these brachas? Says Rav Asher Weiss, lo noag ulevarech. The minig is not to. We already don't have a minig. When we don't see ourselves for 30 days, we don't make a bracha shechianu. That's not the minig. With the time at the Milsa Marti, there's a reason why this minig has fallen out of favor. The bebrachos elo, osha nikshel levarach bracha levatoma. what'll happen is really you didn't need to make the bracha, and you have a bracha levatol on your hands. Or it will create pirud, disharmony among people. He says, think about the following. Adam roa le'acher shloshim shnayim Adam roa le'achar shloshim shonim chaver miyamim yamima. This person sees friends that he hasn't seen in many years. He wouldn't be able to make one bracha on both of them because it hasn't been the same time frame. He's good friends with one guy, he's not good friends with the other guy. He doesn't really care about the other guy. If he says the bracha shechianu to one friend and the other guy he hears it and he doesn't make and you don't make the bracha for him, he's going to be embarrassed and going to cause pain to him. You give both of them the bracha and you really didn't intend to you weren't happy about the other guy, so it's a bracha levatala. You said the name of Hashem levatala. Mitam zel nir laniyas daiti. Says Rav Asher, one should refrain from making these brachos. This is not like a bracha that you make on benching a lulav, or a bracha for eating, or a bracha after you eat, which is a chiyuv. These are brachos reshus. If you want to say it, you can say it. So therefore, although he says, you see a friend who is healed from a bad illness. You should give thanks to Hashem for the fact that Hashem sent them a refuah shleima. You shouldn't say the bracha. In English, you say thank God. And you should do it the same thing. Just because there isn't a certain bracha, you should still always thank HaKadosh Baruch. Now, in contrast, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, the son of Rav Ovadia, the current chief rabbi, the current Sephardic chief rabbi of the state of Israel, holds that one who does not exclusively follow the rulings of the Mishnah Berurah should indeed recite Shechianu in our scenario, which is by COVID, as well as any time that one is happy to see a friend that he has not seen in 30 days. You come back to yeshiva, you haven't seen your friend for a couple of months. All avodah, back to work. He's very happy to see him. If you look in the Achronim, even though you received letters from him, and you've heard regards from him within 30 days, you haven't seen him and you see him again after 30 days, you have to, again, he's going after the Shulchan Aruch. Of course, he's a Sephardi. Hearing about somebody's, about news about somebody is nothing like seeing somebody. He's spa'alut v'hisrakshut hanafshit, right? The wonder and the emotional feelings leads to a stronger feeling and therefore requires a bracha.
But he does say chaver meyuchad. He just said like a special friend, not just like a regular friend. So
I agree. It's exactly what the Mishnah, the Shulchan Aruch said there. Hu shechaviv alav harbe.
Yeah.
So ein chanami. It's a special friend.
Yeah.
Rav Shlomo Aviner also holds that one would recite Shechianu in this situation. He was asked specifically about the corona pandemic. Sheila, mi shelo roas chaver Yosef b'shlosh yom mishum nigufa corona. You didn't see somebody. They were in quarantine. You were in quarantine. It has nothing to do with illness. You didn't see your friend because you guys were in quarantine. Ma im dibru b'telephone or ro achad et hasheni b'Zoom. Like we do every week. We see each other in Zoom or we talk on the phone. Would that make a difference? Says Rav Aviner. Yesh poskim shekosvu shelo adik labracha Zoom mishum sibos shono. They gave various reasons why you would make this bracha. Ach kamor achronim rabim kein kosvu levar, but there are many achronim that say you shouldn't make the bracha. V'chein kosvu Maran Rav Kook in Sidur Olas Re'iyah. Vani Adal, he says, me, I'm the poor one. Ra'isi Talmidei Chachamim v'anshe Ma'aser Rabim. He saw many great Talmidei Chachamim. Shekimu din zeu baruch hu shechionu b'mor ponim al chavreim. He saw people do this bracha many times. L'chein b'ofen pashut, yesh levarach al misha chaviv, like Yaakov said, on a very good friend, you should make a bracha. L'chein nifsak pashut yichav v'das, right? V'afilu l'fi poskim, haninoim levarach brachas, even according to poskim, who don't want you to make this bracha. There's a unanimity of opinion that on a relative or somebody who's coming out of a danger, he says, Ayin halichot Shlomo, that's Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and the Shut Shevet Alevi Rav Vosner, and Vagon Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap, right, who was the Talmid Muvik of Rav Kook, Birech Shechianu al Bno B'choro, he made a bracha of Shechianu on his Bechor, Kishachazar Ma'Amerika after a long period of time. V'chein noag agon of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach al Bno Kishachazar Belgia le'eretz lachar shana. So you see, Rav Aviner gives us lots of examples of Gedolim that did make this bracha.
Ernie, I have a question. Wasn't there a bracha we say when you see somebody who's recovered from an illness? Don't we say Baruch Hashem HaKolam Refrech Olim? Is there a halacha like that?
I know about the bracha of Shechianu after 30 days and the bracha of Machai Mesim after 12 months. You say there's a bracha, specific bracha that you say.
Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought there was a bracha you say when you see.
Well, no, when a person himself is healed from an illness, he has to make a birchas hagomel.
Hagomel, but when you see somebody else who recovered from an illness.
I don't know of any specific bracha like that, but maybe there is. So you'll research that.
Maybe it's the minhag that we did when you were younger. I don't know.
Huh?
Maybe it was the minhag that we had when we were younger.
I mean, we said Baruch Rafei Cholim, but without the shame. I don't remember ever saying it with the shame.
Yeah, that's like this concept that we learned tonight from Rav Usher, that you should always thank God, even if there's no bracha established, a certain specific bracha established for an event. So maybe that's what people said, Baruch Rafei Cholim, when you saw somebody who had healed from an illness, and that's doing what we're supposed to do, which is thanking Hashem, but without Shem Malchus, like Sidney said.
Right.
What about Birchas HaGomel? So, in our discussion regarding Shechianu, another question that arises after someone recovers from COVID is, does he cite Birchas HaGomel? Should one recite it the same way that one recited after recovering from a serious illness? In order to understand this question, we will first examine the basic halacha of Birchas HaGomel in the case of illness, and see how some contemporary rabbanim have ruled in the case of COVID. So there's a famous Gemara in Brachas about the people who have to express gratitude to Hashem upon being saved. What are the four cases? Brachas nun daled amid beis. Amravid amarab. Arbot tzrichin lahoidos. Yordei hayam, people who are travelers in the ocean, and that's based on that. We who travel by jet, it's been paskin that when you fly in the sky, it's like you're traveling in the ocean. Yordei hayam, holchei midbaros, people who traveled in the desert and came back. Somebody was sick and got healed. Somebody was in prison, came out. And the halach is quoted in the Shulchan Aruch. But there's a fundamental machlokas between Sfardim and Ashkenazim based on a machlokas between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. How extent of the illness is necessary to warrant reciting the bracha? Says Rav Yosef Karo, the kol chol sorech levarich afilu eno choli shel sakon. Any illness that you got healed from, you have to make a birchas hagomel. Not just chodesh shel kana v'lo maka shel chalal, like an internal injury. Elakol she'ol lemita v'yora. Somebody who was sick enough that he had to get to bed, and then he got out of bed. He says it's like somebody who was taken up onto the gallows to be hung, and then to be judged. So the Shulchan Aruch seems to suggest that Birchas HaGomel is made even when you recover from a non-life-threatening illness. Says the Ramah, this is an Orach Chaim ratio test. Yesh oimrim deina mevarak rak al choyle sheish bo sakona. Could go makash al chalal, like an internal injury. According to Shulchan Aruch, one recited Gomel after recovering from any illness for which one was confined to bed, which is the level of illness for which one could ask a Gentile to violate Shabbos. So normally, Amir la'akum, you cannot tell a non-Jew to do something for you on Shabbos that you yourself cannot do. But there are leniencies. So for example, if someone is chole to the point where you're driven to bed, you can ask a non-Jew to turn off the light or open the light or do something for you on Shabbos. Now, in contrast, the Ramah holds that only a life-threatening illness would warrant reciting Birchas HaGomel. And the generally accepted custom is for Sfardim to follow the opinion of Shulchan Aruch, and for Ashkenazim to follow the opinion of the Ramah. Though the Mishnah Berurah mentions that some Ashkenazi poskim recommend following the opinion of Rav Yosef Karo. So how does this relate to recovery from COVID? One approach is to simply apply the rules we've seen so far. Consequently, Sfardim found the Shulchan Aruch should recite Hagomel if one was sick in bed with the virus, similar to having the flu. Certainly if one experienced more severe symptoms. But somebody who only had mild symptoms, not to the point where it drove you to bed, would not recite Birchas HaGomel when you got there. Conversely, Ashkenazim, following the Ramah, would recite Hagomel only in cases where it was life-threatening, such as if one was in the hospital with difficulty breathing, placed on a respirator, etc. Rav Asher Weiss takes a position close to this one, but adds that even Ashkenazim who experienced a more serious case should recite Birchas HaGomel after recovering, since these types of cases have sometimes led to life-threatening conditions. Let's see the Mincha Susha. Somebody got sick from corona. So he starts off, a sick person who got healed. The Rambam says anyone who is ill should recite the bracha on recovery. The Das Tur, Rak Cholish Yesh B'Sakana. Uv'she'ela zu nechlaku HaShulchan Aruch v'Ramah. The Das Beis Yosef, who followed the Rambam, Kol Chol Tzarech Levarach. The Das Ramah, who followed the Tur, Rak Cholish Yesh B'Sakana. The Im came, Pashut Shebnei Kilot Sfardim Yivarchu. So Sfardim should make the bracha. Ulal Nias Daiti, in my humble opinion, Gam Bnei Kilos Ashkenaz. Even Ashkenazim, Misha Chala Ba'ofen Kal B'yoter Lo Yivarchu. someone had no symptoms, he just tested positive or whatever, he had very mild symptoms, he doesn't have to bench a good. Somebody was forced to bed. Even though the doctors told the person, you were not, it wasn't life-threatening. The mortality rate is higher in this disease, and therefore he says if the person caught a risky disease, and even if the doctors didn't say it was life-threatening, if at least you were sick enough to go to bed, he says you should make the bracha. Another support to this opinion of Weiss, that even Ashkenazim with a serious case of COVID but not life-threatening should recite a gomel, can be found in the Chai Adam. According to the Chai Adam, if one barely avoided a potentially life-threatening situation, such as a rock being thrown at him but just missing him, even Ashkenazim should recite a gomel. In Bo Alav Ganovim, or Shenofel Evan or Barzel Samach, if you're walking by a house and something fell off the roof and it barely missed you. Avol Bishai B'Sakonis Misa, even Nafal Alav, it would have been life-threatening if it fell on him. Einam Avarech Shasili Nes. You don't make a bracha that a nes was done for you. Aval Achronim Iskimu Levarach HaGomel. But the Achronim agree that you should make HaGomel in that situation. So like a near miss, like a car, people have been in a near miss car accident or something like that. Based on this Chai Adam, you would make a Birchas HaGomel. Rav Yitzchak Grossman of the Beis Vad in Lakewood considers the possibility that perhaps the Chai Adam and those who hold like him would require anyone who contracted COVID to recite a gomel, since by itself it's a potentially life-threatening disease. But he also cites Rav Daniel Neustadt, author of the weekly halacha discussion, who did not feel that one should do so in a mild case. Says Rav Grossman, in light of the above, it is obvious that one who recovers from a severe life-threatening case of COVID certainly would recite the bracha. The halacha is less clear regarding one who recovers from a mild case. On the one hand, the patient was not in any actual danger, and some achronim rule that one who avoided a thrown stone or evaded any pursuit does not recite the bracha. It's only the Chai Adam who said it, but the Ramah did not say it, as it is only recited by the experience of actual danger and salvation, and not when the danger was avoided. So that's an important differentiating point between the Chai Adam and the Ramah. Other achronim, like the Chai Adam, disagree, ruling that a gomel is indeed recited by one who escapes potential lethal injury when a falling rock narrowly misses him. Similarly, some poskim assert that walking under a dangerously leaning wall would have obligated one the bracha, were it not for the fact that the event is transient and brief. Moreover, in our case, the patient actually did suffer from COVID, an inherently deadly disease, and his condition could have deteriorated. So perhaps he does recite the bracha. Rav Neustadt, in a personal communication, wrote to him, "It's partial to me that one who has a mild case does not recite a gomel, since the vast majority of people contact COVID recover easily without any danger. So in most cases, it's merely a nuisance, in which there's a clear minhag that we do not recite a gomel." So I think we're seeing tonight, the breadth, the width and breadth of these opinions, people have to rely on. Rav Yitzchak Rubin, author of the Orchas Shabbos on Hilchas Shabbos, and rabbi of the Bnei Torah Shul in Har Nof, where a terrorist attack took place a number of years ago, agrees that one with a light case of COVID does not recite a gomel, but one who is hospitalized may possibly recite it even when the danger was not imminent. Even though there is no treatment to this illness, we call makom that Hashem in His wisdom, this disease affects people differently. The vast majority has a very mild illness. Some have a fever for a period of time. Some feel very weak. Some have difficulty breathing. And some have to go to the hospital because of that. They need oxygen. They need medicine. The plasma, right? Some need to be given anesthesia and be placed on a ventilator. Our question is, when is he considered in danger? Everyone starts off in a very similar way. Some people, their body sort of fights the illness. They deteriorate until they're in a state of danger. So some people overpower the illness, and some the illness overpowers the person. So he says there's always a chance that this illness can become dangerous. You don't know for sure when it starts out who's going to be who. So it's not true to say that anyone who gets this disease is considered in danger. So he points out the complexity here. It's hard to set a specific get there on this. Each person is going to be different. Somebody who had corona didn't get hospitalized. Somebody ended up in the hospital. He got some kind of medicine, or got treated with oxygen. He should let's say somebody was hospitalized and only given, let's say, oxygen by nasal cannula, but didn't need, the plasma. So there he says it's not clear. But he couldn't breathe normally. Maybe he was heading towards danger. So he says that those issues might be a little tricky. On the other hand, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, the current Sephardic chief rabbi, writes that even those who only had light symptoms should still recite Agomel, since this illness can quickly take a turn for the worse, even those with light symptoms, and it should be considered potentially dangerous. It seems from his wording that not only does he believe that Sephardim, who normally recite Agomel even after an illness confining one to bed, should recite Agomel, and who is not in Sakana, but even Ashkenazim should do it. People who were sick with corona got well. If after he had the illness, he tested twice and with a negative COVID test, even though many people with COVID didn't end up in bed, but he could have. Many people were walking around like a good person, like a healthy person. But we know that this pandemic is dangerous. People died quickly. He says it's a davar pashut that it's considered a chol sheish b'sakana. He's basically speaking to us Ashkenazim, and he's saying that you who follow the Ramah, who said you should always make a birchas hagomel when you're healed from a chol sheish b'sakana. Rav Yitzchak Yosef is saying it's clear that this is a sakana, and therefore, if you got out of it with nothing, you should make a birchas hagomel. Even if it wasn't life-threatening. They have other symptoms, a headache. Other poskim have offered more specific guidelines to this question to take into account not just the severity of the illness, but also the age of the person. The reason is that for those who are older, even a lighter case has the ability to deteriorate quickly into a more severe case. These distinctions are highlighted by Yaakov Shlomo Mosisin, a well-known posek in Ramot. This is his ruling for Ashkenazim. He comes right away and says that the illness is considered sakon. If he had a strong case, to go on Shayalo Shi'ul, cough, chom, fever, kavim batzmat, bone pain, chulsha, weakness, v'nafal l'mishkav, and went to bed. Afilu im lo higil l'sakon, v'lo hayat tzarich l'ansham. He didn't need oxygen. Says he chayav l'varach hagomel k'sheyachlim. When he gets healed, he's chayav to make the bracha. Kiven shenechla v'choyli kazeh. Since he had an illness, he could have become life-threatening at any minute. He says it will depend on age and severity of symptoms. Anashim Tsirim Agil 35. People up until the age of 35, who were sick, he says it's a suffix whether you make a birchas hagomel. Kivan shebegil zebeder klal ein rogeli kanis matzav sakana. It's unusual at that age to be in sakana. However, on Hashim Tsirim under 35, shenechlu bafen kal v'lo naflu l'mishkav, under the age of 35, if you were in bed but not, if you had a light case which did not send you to bed, einam chayav levarach hagomel. Afilu misofek. Afilu hayulem simonim shem yichadim le'achlazu. If he had specific symptoms like loss of smell or taste. Anashim migil 35 ad 40. Shenechlu ba'ofen chazak v'naflu le'mishkav. If he's in bed, b'pashtut chayav levarach birchas hagomel ach kiven shekasher lachriya b'zeh alachol ha'maisa yishtadu latzeis me'echad hachayav b'brachos hagomel vaday. He should wait until somebody who really needs the bracha, because he was life-threatening, let him make the bracha and he'll answer amen to it, because it's a suffix. Now, Anoshim Agil Shishim, up until the age of 60, Shenechlu B'ofen Kabbalah, if they weren't in bed, Ein Chayol Levarach Birchas hagomel, even me suffix. And if you're above the age of 40, Shenechlu B'ofen Kashev and Aflu Mishkav Chayol Levarach Birchas hagomel Vaday, and Anashim Igil Shishim L'mal 60 and up, Shenitgalu Etzlam Simanim Brurim Shalamachala, they have definite signs and symptoms of the illness, but they weren't put, like, let's say loss of taste or loss of smell. Achlona Aflu Mishkav, but they weren't in bed. Still says him, Bepashtus Chayov Levarach Abal Mishum Chaymer Bracha Vatala. He should wait until somebody who vaday needed the bracha and be yotze from him. Let's say, guy, you feel better, but you haven't been to the lab to be checked that you're COVID negative. That's what he's talking about. So you can still make the bracha. That means if he's feeling better, but the lab comes back saying that he's still positive, The kivan shekvar she'eino margish b'atzmo luckily doesn't feel any symptoms. So it's interesting to note that Rav Moses and Rav Yosef appear to disagree about when a coronavirus patient is considered to have recovered for purposes of a gomel. According to Rav Yosef, he needs to have been tested twice, like we said, with negative results. While Rav Moses allows one to recite a gomel, even if one still tests positive. Concerning how such a person would be able to recite the bracha, which is generally recited with a minyan, if he's still in quarantine from testing positive, we're going to have a shiur later on the halachos of Zoom, that according to some, it may be recited with a minyan over Zoom. Now, Rav Avram Maimon, a Rav in the Katamon section of Yerushalayim, also distinguishes between different ages, but in a less far-reaching manner. In his opinion, the primary distinction in his age is between and above and below 60, as that is when it has been accepted by the medical community that one is higher risk. He says, Adin mischalek l'gimel chalokim. Sa'ir, a young person, which according to this definition is under 60. I'm not sure there's anybody in this. Oh yeah, Michael Summer is under 60. Chaim, are you 60 yet? Chaim. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, we still have some young people in the group. Tza'ir, she'eno mekvutzot bala sikun. Young person who's not in the risk categories, like somebody who's very overweight, somebody has hypertension, other medical problems. Ve'lo machalat reka, right? Other pre-existing conditions. Shenasasani, who has now contracted the epidemic. Avaloy alas tismoni, but doesn't have symptoms. Shalchom v'kotzer neshima, for example, fever and shortness of breath. Elayak echad abriyim, but he was healthy. Nira sheishmaz birchas hagomel me'acher. He shouldn't make the birchas hagomel himself. He should listen it from somebody else. However, Adam Uvugar Me'al Gil Shishim, Shaya Bal Sikun Gavoa, who was in a high risk category, or Adam Im Machloket Reka, or anybody with pre-existing illnesses, Shenasas Anagif, who got the illness, V'hayu Lehem Ma'at Tasminim. Also, if they only had minor symptoms, Kagon Chom, even so, Hare Mavarchim Agomel. And he says, V'lo tzarich lomer Adam Shaya Choleh U'Mushpat Ve'Cholim. Certainly anybody in the hospital, v'yatsa michlal sakanat mavet, b'vadai tzarich levarech l'odot l'olel shebech l'shem yibreich kol v'kol. What about tearing kriya upon visiting the kotel following the government lockdown? It's not so matsui for us who don't live in Israel, but we'll see soon that seeing the kotel over a video, some people say you also you do certain acts even over a video. And Yaakov and his wife and Susie and I don't know I know Yaakov has expressed, I think Yaakov has made I'm not sure you've made your final plans, but you may be, right, I heard you may be joining us on the Mizrahi mission at the end of the month to Israel, which is very good news. By the way, anybody else who would like to join, there's a mission coming from the United States, the RZA, visiting Israel at the end of May for a week. It's going to be a very nice program. Anybody's interested, please let me know. And so we will be visiting the Kotel. So this is going to be very nogea for us. We will conclude this year on issues of COVID related to brachos and archayim with a brief discussion of kriya, tearing one's garment upon visiting the kotel. Shulchan Aruch, based on the Gemara Moed Katan, rules that one must tear one's garment upon visiting the kotel after having not seen it for 30 days and seen the location of Beit HaMikdash as an expression of mourning. That's why all of us have been taught that if you haven't seen the kotel for a long time, you go on Shabbos, where you're not allowed to tear kriya. So by seeing it, so now you don't have to tear kriya anymore when you go back the next time.
Ernie, isn't it? You can go anytime there's no tachnun, so you can go like Shabbos, like Erev Shabbos after Mincha, Friday after Mincha. That's what I learned.
Yeah, there are
Why
numbers.
does Friday after Mincha,
Because
when
you
it's
can't
not
do
Shabbos
Kriya,
yet,
you
prevent
cannot
you
do
from doing Kriya?
The Kriya, when there's no Tachanun, you don't do Kriya. So, for example, if you go on Rosh Chodesh, during the Kotel for the first time, there's no Kriya because you can't do Kriya on that. If you say it's same thing, Erev Shabbos, you don't, if you go, Erev Shabbos, you go Erev Shabbos, Mincha time, after Chatzos, basically, or after Mincha Gedola, there's no Kriya because.
Okay. I was always taught to go on Shabbos itself, but that certainly could be the din. We'll see if I don't think they comment on that in this shiur, but we'll see.
I know many of the yeshivas.
Yeah, by the way, there's an amira you're supposed to say. Beis kodshenu v'tifartenu, asher hilalucha bo avotenu, hayal sreifat eish, v'kol machmadenu hayal cherva, v'korea. So you make that statement and then you tear kriya. Many people nowadays, specifically those who live in Jerusalem, do not practice this custom every time they visit the Kotel, as it is relatively easy to visit any time, and they do not necessarily feel the strong feelings of mourning and sorrow every time they visit. We will discuss this, God willing, in future Tzurba M'Rabanan shiur where it's appropriate, where it appears in Shulchan Aruch, in Orach Chayim. Right now we're in Yoredeya, so they're going to discuss this in detail later. But since the Kotel was closed to nearly all visitors for almost 2 months, the question arose whether all those who visit the Kotel should tear Kriya after that. So Rav Yitzchak Yosef ruled that those who do not usually tear Kriya and visit the Kotel need not do so after the restrictions imposed during the first wave of COVID. Misha Garb Yushalayim. Davru alav 30 yom shelo ra'a makom beis hamikdash b'churbeinu. Das HaRadbaz should tzorech likro. The Rabbaz said you have to tear Kriya. Kach posuk b'shus Igrish Moshe. Ulam maran achida b'birkei Yosef kosav shelo noagu came. Ha'emet hi shegam Radbaz kosav de lo zir b'zeh. The Radbaz said people were not careful in this. The Gamar of Tikachunsky, the Gesher HaChaim, Rav Mechel Tikachunsky, who lived in the 1920s, 1930s, was one of the major poskim in Israel and wrote the Gesher HaChaim.
Also wrote a lot about the dateline.
Say again?
He also wrote about the international dateline. He's one of the major opinions on the dateline.
Right, and he's all over the place. Yeah. He's one of the major poskim of the early 20th century, no question about it. So Besifro Eretz Yisrael shenohagim lahakil. So he also said that for people who live in Jerusalem, the minig was not to be stringent about it. Maran Chazon Ovadia, right? Ovadia Yosef in Tanias Vavelis Kosav Shemisha Garbi Yerushalayim HaChadasha. Somebody who lives in new areas of Yerushalayim, Shchunat HaBuchrim, Beit Yisrael, Beit Vagan, Beit HaKerem, Ramot, Mistaber Shetzarech Likro. They don't live anywhere near the old city, and he says they have to. If they haven't been to the Kotel for 30 days, they have to tear Kriya. Ki afilu lo yitkarev l'mokom hamikdash, aval noagu lahakel, ki sof sof ze mechuber Yerushalayim. He says the minig was to be makel because it's connected to Yerushalayim. Ukamolin in Kriyas HaMegillah bepurim. Shekol hashchunot halalu mitchabrot Yerushalayim lekor b'tesvav b'adar. Just because you're not in the walled city itself, the people who live in Yerushalayim and all the suburbs of Yerushalayim practice a Shushan Purim because it's considered mischaber lYerushalayim. V'gam ka'es b'tkufat ha'magefa. So now in the epidemic time, af shelo hayta efsharut lavo lakotel b'orot hashiltonot. The government prevented people from going there. Aval yachlu lirot et hakotel me'arov ha'yehudi. You could go to the. You didn't have to go to the Kotel itself. You could go to the Jewish quarter and see the Kotel, right? Mishivat Porat Yosef Chadome. L'chein toshavei Yerushalayim inam tzrichim likroa. He says people who live in Yerushalayim don't have to tear.
I've actually seen something very interesting here that I might point out, that The Sfardim refer to three people as Maran, and we've actually just seen them in 3 pages. They refer to the Shulchan Aruch,
Correct.
to the Chaim Yosef David Azulai, who lived in the 18th century, and Avadia Yosef as Maran. And we've actually seen 3 references to Maran, one on page 160 on the Corona, and here by Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, his father. So you've actually seen all the Maranim for the Sfardim in 2 pages here.
Right. Well, for them, the Mora Da'asra of Eretz Yisrael was Rav Yosef Kar. That's the Moran. Now, the Chidah also made Aliyah, right? The Chidah, I think, is buried in Yerushalayim or visited Yerushalayim, right?
I think he was born in Yerushalayim. I think he died in Italy.
I see, but I know he had Shaykhs Yerushalayim.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Rav Avadia is Moran. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. So, in contrast, Rav Shmuel Rabinovitz, he is the rabbi of the Kotel in the holy sites. He issued a ruling that all visitors, except for those who can actually see the Kotel and the Temple Mount from their homes, had to indeed tear Kriya when visiting the Kotel again. So, he says for 2 months the Kotel was closed. There was a great desire for people to go back and revisit, to pour out their hearts and tefillah. And certainly in this time of the epidemic, Tzar Yaakov. There are people who go to daven to the Kotel every day. These people tried to come to the Kotel. But they weren't allowed to reach there. The government kept them out. He's writing in a very poetic way. The place that was full of life, the beating heart of the Jewish people, notar sagur b'fnei mitpalim, was left closed. I can't help but see a lot of negativity in that paragraph towards the government. You see it in his language, in his choice of words, and just his phraseology, that you could see that they should have kept the Kotel open, because you got to daven there, despite the danger of spreading the illness. But it's very clear from the language that he was not happy with that ruling. Although he says, Hashem has had the mercy on us, that it's now, according to the Ministry of Guidelines, the Health Ministry, now it's reopened. Alavai will remain open forever. So he says, he has to tear at least a tefach, somebody who hasn't seen the Kotel in 30 days. He says it's there's no exceptions. Even the people who live in Jerusalem, except for people who live like right next door. Right? They saw the Kotel throughout. Somebody doesn't live right next door and didn't see it. He says the minig is not to tear. He wants to say, since a person didn't come for 30 days, it shows he doesn't really experience the sorrow of the Churban, and therefore he's not roy to do Kriya. It's like a catch-22. Below ba ain't a roy likra, right? He didn't bother to come. So he's not really fit to tear. Ulam ka'et. But this Rabbi Rabinovitz says, here we were prevented from going to the Kotel. There was a lockdown. So chovav al kulam likro b'vam u'makom hamikdash. He says it's a chova to tear. Should someone who does not live in Israel and is unable to visit, but wishes to gaze at the kotel on a kotel cam, tear kriya? Now, this question is relevant anytime. It's nothing to do with Corona, but it's relevant during COVID, where travel to Israel will not be permitted. Rav Hershel Schachter writes in the Tzurba. Now, this Tzurba is about reciting Birchas Ilanos. When you see a blooming fruit tree in Nisan, you make the bracha ala perus. So that in that Tzurba, he talks well about visually seeing the kotel by video. That viewing something on a computer screen, it's a suffix, whether it's treated halachically significant. Since one usually experiences more emotion upon seeing in these cases when it is live than when seeing on video. Therefore, he rules that one would not tear kriya if you see the kotel by a cam. When you see something with your own eyes, there's a certain emotion that takes place. Sometimes shal simcha, sometimes sadness. Sometimes seeing something by video doesn't give you the same punch. Now, looking at a Zoom, you get more than looking at a still picture. He says a video is not as if someone is sitting there right in front of you. That's Ovadia Yosef in Yechavedas. Kosav b'zeh sheyesh l'dona k'sfeika dedina im dina karoa. He felt there was a suffix midin whether video is like seeing. Bismada adayin Zoom. It wasn't Zoom in Rav Ovadia's time. There was live television, which is similar. If there's a doubt in dealings of kriya, we go lahakel and we don't tear. So the whole thing of kriya is rabbanon. Ubeis shesavik baltashkis daraisu. And when you tear a garment, you're destroying it, and baltashkis is daraisu. Mimele haroyas hakoisel derech zoom. So if you see the kotel by a kotel cam, afu b'shekvar avru lamed yom, even if it's beyond 30 days, ain't a korea. V'machar kach toch lamed yom yavob raglav vaker eitzel makom hamikdash. And then, let's say within 30 days of seeing it by Zoom, you physically went there. God came in a korea, because maybe it's a suffix. Maybe seeing it by the kotel cam was a re'iyah. So if you're within 30 days after seeing it by kotel cam, you also would make a bracha according to Rav Hershel. Very interesting is our prayer that the entire Jewish people, all of those who live in Eretz Yisrael and those who do not, will merit to be able to see the location of the kotel speedily in our day with the rebuilding the Bayis Shlishi. Okay, we will stop here tonight, and we will continue Mitzvah Hashem next week about wearing masks. All the various halachos, we're still wearing masks, so I think it's very, very relevant, some of the questions that are going to be asked, like can you wear a mask during davening? Is there a need of wearing a special mask on Shabbos? Can you wear a mask without an eruv?
Does the mask?
I think there'll be some interesting shilas there.
Does the mask have to match your hat?